Welcome to the PR in Lockdown podcast, your guide to PR and communications in a post-lockdown world, in collaboration with the PRCA. In this episode, I'm talking to not one, but two very special guests, George Blizzard and Nicky Regazzoni, from the virtual international PR agency, the PR Network. A virtual PR agency, that's really key here. George and Nicky are virtual PR veterans and built the PR Network as a virtual business since its creation in 2005. They bring a fascinating perspective with their story of lockdown, as well as providing some essential insights into virtual businesses, especially now as we start planning for a post-lockdown reality. George and Nicky, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Hi, Rob.
Brilliant, awesome. And so, Nicky, let's start with you. We're going to be throwing between each other as we're all in different locations, which is pretty exciting stuff. Nicky, we'll start with you. I heard that you two actually met on a hen do, and that was the start of the PR Network.
Yeah, I think you've been talking to the PRCA. Yeah, that's actually true. We met probably almost 20 years ago on a hen do, and we're both working in tech PR for tech agency specialists. We hit it off. We were kind of both about 8 years into our career. And shortly after that, I actually went to work with George at Bytes. And then we, over time, obviously formed a firm friendship. And I went on to work at a couple of other places, went freelance. And then George and I, over another glass of wine in a bar, came up with the idea of building a new type of agency that would be designed as virtual from the ground up. So people think of virtual agencies these days as being predominantly companies where people are working in teams without an office, because obviously offices have been shut because of the pandemic. But actually, for us, we put the agency together in this way because we wanted to be able to access the best talent on the market. And we knew that there were many people that had decided to go freelance for whatever reason, left the agency, jumped off the agency ladder with fantastic experience under their belts. And we thought there was a business case for an agency based on this talent with fantastic senior experts all around the world that we could pull together and put on client briefs and manage via a hub.
Why did you guys, right at the beginning, decide to go virtual? Just to give people's perspective, 2005, smartphones weren't even around. We were still using Windows XP. Zoom, Microsoft Teams was not around, and Skype was only about 2 years old. So what was the decision process then in 2005 to actually be a virtual PR agency?
Robbie, you're really aging us. You introduced us as veterans, and now you're there long before smartphones.
Dynamic veterans.
Dynamic. Okay, we're focused on that. But no, I think, it's partly amazing timing. Obviously, we met on that hen do. Nicky was in a position where she was going freelance, and there wasn't an agency built like ours to cater for freelance people to really kind of build on that freelance career. So it was partly that. It was partly the fact that I had my first child. I was going on mat leave at Bytes, and we just thought now is as good a time as any to try out this model that we came up with, again, over a couple of glasses of wine. There's a theme here. So for us, it was about perfect timing and an opportunity, I suppose, to take a bit of a leap of faith. And we certainly felt from Nicky's experience, there was a lot more that could be done in terms of supporting people who often get to the top of their career. And if you're a woman particularly at that point, there weren't many options to come back and work flexibly. And we really wanted to explore that, particularly with my experience having a child and Nicky's experience of freelancing. It kind of, the two married really well together.
So talk through just the bare bones of how the PR network then works. What are the systems in place? What do you guys put together and deliver?
So now the way it works is we take a brief from a client, whether an existing client or a prospective client, and then we look within the network to find the best people who we can put together in a virtual team to deliver against that brief. So it's very scalable and it's very flexible because clients can scale their budgets up and down, and we can respond by putting people on and taking them off accounts. So I think our largest account now is across 18 countries. And then, we also work with very small companies that perhaps just might need support from one experienced person. So it's very scalable. And we have, I think, about 50 clients at any one time. Some are working with us on a retained basis, some are projects. And we work with lots of big brands and small companies as well.
I was going to say at the heart of that, the glue, I suppose, that brings all of that together is that Nicky touched on it before, but the PR and our actual hub, our core team, we've been working like this for a very long time. We know how to run virtual teams. We know how to build up that culture and that ethos, which bounds all of our associates, whether they're working, in Mexico or France or the UK, that binds it all together.
Interesting, and you've emphasised there the international aspect of your business. You really are an internationally based, service. What's been the impact of this pandemic? Let's go back now to the start of lockdown. What's been the impact? Perhaps, I don't know, Nicky, if you pick this up.
Sure. I mean, obviously, it's been a roller coaster. I think that's an understatement. At the start of the pandemic, I think, as we looked at the business, we felt somewhat protected because we are a generalist agency. We're not specialising in any one sector, and we're working across so many different markets. And, some of those went down into lockdown early and are now opening up, and vice versa. So I think at the beginning, because we're a virtual agency, there was sort of this perception that we might be okay and we might not be too affected by things. But obviously, over time, some of our clients' own businesses started to be impacted, and they had to put some of our programs on pause. So we started to see impact, on our projected revenues and so on. Countries such as Germany put a lot of staff writers on furlough, which has made it very difficult to run the normal programs that you would run there in terms of media relations. And others, it hasn't been so much the case. So there's been a lot of sort of international variance. But again, because we are working across so many countries and sort of have that global view, that's been quite helpful because we've sort of seen a bit of an ebb and flow in terms of how our accounts have been running and what's been working and how people have been affected.
So interesting there. It seems like for you, it wasn't there wasn't a sort of cliff edge drop. It was you've been dealing with a very sort of up and down few months. Where things have been appearing and industries have been rising up and some industries have been sort of having to go down into the furlough. So it's been a very mixed bag the last few months.
Yeah, I'd say, like everyone, there's that period of utter shock. And I think you definitely felt that. You felt that you took stock of what was actually happening, both in your personal life and your professional life. And I think your clients did that as well. I think those first few weeks was, okay, let's take stock, let's absorb, understand. But yeah, as Nicky says, we're really protected in some ways by that international reach and also that mix of sector. I mean, we don't have a majority of clients in hospitality or travel and leisure. We have lots in technology, and actually, as you're probably aware, technology has fared perhaps the best throughout this. So I think we were able to make kind of the best of that situation. But we did have, I'd be wrong to say if we didn't feel that period of absolute, that feeling that you're on the precipice, I suppose.
What was that first 4 months, or the past 4 months really, how did you initially plan how to respond? What's been the impact as well on your network, on your freelance and contractors, those specialists who've been using you and relying on you for that work?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's been a huge concern for us in terms of sort of taking care of that group. Keeping very close to our clients, talking to them on a weekly or daily basis to work out how their plans were going to change, whether they needed us to support them in a different way, provide a different range of services, or increase or decrease budget or deploy it in a different way as needed, as we talked about earlier. So sort of getting a handle on what clients needed, and then from there how that might impact our business in terms of budgets and our fee incomes and so on. So lots of communications externally with clients.
Was there anything particularly noticeable when you were discussing with clients about what they wanted in the next few months? Was there any big rise or big drop off of certain services? I imagine obviously events might be one thing that you saw a massive decrease in, but were there anything that surprised you there?
Nothing that surprised. I say flexibility. I think that's what they were looking for. Flexibility in council. I think it's one of those situations where when you're in an agency environment, you're able to communicate much more freely, perhaps. But when you're on client side, I think you are very much working, perhaps not in isolation, but in a much smaller team. And I think being able to run ideas past another team member, or perhaps just looking for alternatives and being much more creative in your thinking. So not creative necessarily in the ideas and the what you're pitching, but actually, okay, what can we do here? How can we use that budget more flexibly? How can we, I hate using that word, but pivot? How can we changed the program to address the changing needs of the business. And I think we had lots of conversations that revolved around that. A really good example is shifting budget from external into internal comms. And that's certainly a trend that, you'll have seen yourself within the industry. And that's something we're able to do quite quickly in terms of switching out the teams or just changing the makeup of the team slightly to bring in internal comms experts to support stakeholders within the business. So I think just having really honest, quite difficult conversation with clients and then responding really flexibly was probably the thing we saw the most of.
There are questions got to be asked because you guys are born and the whole of the business from its foundations is a virtual based business. Have you found that the fact that you've got the infrastructure in place as a virtual service provider and a virtual organisation, has that cushioned the blow, do you think? Has that provided you with some benefits or being able to know exactly how you can work, particularly in that lockdown environment of the last few months?
Yeah, I'd say so. If I don't know what you want to add, Neve, but I think absolutely we're already set up. So there was not that case of, people having to drive around dropping off laptops and things like that. We're already set up to work like this. We have all the tech at our disposal, and we're already culturally designed to work remotely from each other. We know how to get the best out of each other, even though we're not in the same room. But I would say, it's not always a picnic either. We were thrown into a situation where all of us, I think there's 16 children throughout the team, all had childcare situations, all of varying ages, right from 15 down to tiny, 2-year-olds. And you had to work very differently. And I think, we had to address that really quickly about how we were going to manage our teams and how our teams are going to manage how they fitted their family life in around the business and how we could blend that all together and still deliver for our clients. So that was something we never had to encounter before.
How did you get around that? What was the best way that you found to really reconcile all these different things that people in this house suddenly have to balance out within their working lives and home lives?
We've been set up from day one to be very flexible, and our core team of 7 are all very senior, so everybody already has a very high degree of flexibility and sort of works where, obviously everyone has to work at home now, but pretty much how they choose, but, still very much in this sort of traditional 9 to 5, way of working. So we just sort of went to the team and said, look, let's throw all of that out the window and you work how you need to, and we'll support that. And George and I have worked very successfully in a job share for, pretty much since day one, working 3 days a week. But we said to the team, we're going to work full time for the duration of the pandemic and as needed. So we did that for about the first 3 months, I think, just sort of so we could help stabilise the business, provide extra resource and so on. A couple of sort of more formal things that we did were introduce a flexible rota system where, team members of our client service directors are working in pairs, sort of doubling up across the day so that there's always cover for clients. And they were working that with their other halves at home as well, because actually we haven't furloughed anyone within the PR network, and also none of our team members' partners have been furloughed. So we've all sort of got this, childcare responsibility juggle issue going on at home, like so many people have. I did want to just touch on your question about our freelance network, because obviously, that's the other sort of, very important part of how we deliver our programs to clients, those people that we work with on a daily basis. So, we've been very mindful of the fact that this has been, very difficult for freelancers. Many senior practitioners are not, in the UK at least, are not able to access any of the government schemes, although we are working with people around the world, so it doesn't apply everywhere, but certainly we're conscious of that. So, obviously we wanted to honour our commitment to always pay freelancers on time. So we've always done that from day one of setting up our company. So we made sure that, financially we were sort of very conscious of our cash flow and able to honour that. And then beyond that, we've set up a couple of new initiatives as well to help our freelance community, the people that work with us on our clients day in, day out. one of which is a series of training programs that George has actually been masterminding, which has been amazing. So we've been running a series of talks that we've called PR Ed Talks, like TED Talks for PR. But yeah, it's a range, from skills-based training to some kind of more life coaching and even some fitness videos, all delivered within a new Facebook group that we've set up as a kind of private peer group community, just to enable people to talk to each other and sort of support each other during this time. And we will carry on with that beyond the pandemic. It was something we wanted to do anyway, but we think people have really appreciated being able to kind of keep their skills up.
That's really interesting. The fact that, you're going to continue something, this new thing that was created purely for lockdown, but actually you see the value of it beyond this, and it's something that you're going to bring into the PR network as a long-term thing. Just before we go to a quick break, I really wanted to talk about what is starting to be discussed, and people are starting to really understand, the impact on mental health of this whole period. I'm just wondering, perhaps George, what your experiences are and the impact on the personal level of the last 4 months.
It's been really tough, hasn't it? I think I talked about it earlier, but there's that period of shock that this is actually happening, and then when that settles in, that kind of, I suppose, a little bit your hopelessness. I suppose you don't know when it's going to end, and there's still no end point, is there? And I think that's what's really hard to deal with. And when you throw in the fact you're a working parent into the mix, I mean, I'm really fortunate that one of my 3 children was attending school from the beginning of June, but lots on our team still don't have their children back at school. So you're really juggling, and you've got a working partner as well. So we were really conscious of that. And Nicky talked about some of the measures we put in place to support the team and ourselves. We also sent out little care packs to our team. Right at the beginning, Nicky and I really felt strongly we wanted them to know that we're in it together. And it was very much a team approach. And, honesty and openness is hugely important. If you cannot work for some reason because it's all too much, or because you just can't make it work today because your children aren't, able to be occupied by something else, that's okay. And I think that's the only way to get through it, is knowing that we're all in the same boat, we're all doing our best, and that's all you can do, is just do your best. And I think what's been amazing about this is, and there's a lot of talk about it, and Maya Pasinska-Sims at Provoke kind of coined this phrase, but being very human. And I think we've tried, obviously our big, we take our personalities to work anyway. We've never had a distinction between who we are and who we are at work. At warts and all, our children when you work with us. But it's been really nice to see that reflected in our clients as well. We've really got to know our clients better. And I think that ability, PR people share. We're big talkers, as you can tell. And that help with the mental health, being able to share your stories, share your situation. I mean, you can see my children's pictures all around me. That has helped, I think, stem what is potentially a really, really difficult time, because none of us know when this is going to end, when it's going to get easier. Hopefully, we're coming towards the end of the worst phase, but just open and honest communications as a team has been probably where we focus, wouldn't you say, Nicky?
Yeah, that's always our priority. Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's really fantastic stuff. We're going to go on a quick break now, but coming up, we'll be talking to Nicky and George about how to tackle that transition from lockdown and what kind of long-term changes we might expect in the PR industry. Don't go anywhere. And of course, it's worth saying that PR in Lockdown is available on your preferred podcast library, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all of that. And of course, if you are into video podcasts, we are available on YouTube. You'll see our smiling faces back at you if you just go and have a look and search on PR in Lockdown on YouTube. We'll see you in 1 second. Welcome back to PR in Lockdown, chatting to George and Nicky from the PR Network. And George, let's talk about where you are right now, because we're in this phase where we're coming out of the lockdown period and the economies are opening up in a lot of international markets where you guys do a lot of your business as a virtual PR agency. So just explain where you guys really are at now.
Yeah, I definitely feel like things are picking up, particularly in the last week or so. It feels a lot more positive. We feel that there's probably, in terms of leads coming in, these being generated, we're back to kind of pre-COVID. Some of those aren't necessarily right for us in terms of the size of the budget, but certainly we feel like there's a lot more interest in the market. Two of our largest clients actually have unpaused, so that's a really good signal for us, which is really exciting. And then when you look at the international markets, obviously, as Nicky talked about earlier, we're really lucky to have that kind of perspective. Things are definitely picking up with those who are further down the line from us. Germany's a really good example when you're looking at this, because obviously the measures they took were different and perhaps they're further along the line. And their journalists are certainly started to come off furlough now. Even in the UK, we're finding in terms of our campaigns, the media relations side of things, that media are now much more open to stories that aren't COVID related. And I think probably because we all are. So it feels better, cautiously better, I'd say.
And you mentioned so you're now back to pre-COVID levels in terms of your revenue, in terms of the sales and the services you've got coming through?
Sadly not revenue. Just in terms of, I suppose, market interest. So in terms of people who are now looking at the market thinking, okay, now is the time to get back out there and communicate. Now is the time to start pressing spend on those budgets. I'd say the budgets that we're seeing aren't back up to pre-COVID. Right. But there's certainly an appetite to start spending money again. I think it'd be a while before we see the budgets going back to pre-COVID. But it's nice to see, we have got lots of inbound leads coming to us via our website and various different channels. And we're feeling a lot more activity there, that's for sure.
Do you have people coming to you who are particularly interested in the fact that you guys are a virtual PR agency and that they've experienced the last few months and actually they're more interested in the model that you offer? And as you've said, that flexibility that you can offer in your service by having that worldwide access to those specialist freelancers and consultants. Is that something that you found? Because that, for me, just thinking about it from an outsider, that might be something that I'd think would be, of particular interest to a lot of people moving forwards.
Yeah, I think so. What's really interesting for us, obviously, before this, if we go back 10, even 5 years ago, Nicky and I and the team, we had to explain quite a lot of how it worked. We're virtual, yes, but we work really well together. We understand how teams work, so it doesn't matter if we're not in the same location. And that used to be sometimes a bit of a stumbling block or sometimes hard for people to understand. Obviously, that's completely taken off the table now. People get it. They know it works. They've been used to doing it themselves. Whether that's increased the inbound leads, I think yes. And I think perhaps coming to us over another agency now would be seen as a plus because they know we're already set up and we're not having perhaps the same tech issues or same cultural issues that they might have with another agency. So yeah, perhaps in a long way of answering that question, yes, I think so.
I think that, historically, maybe as George said, there was a bit of a stigma around us being virtual, non-traditional. Certain clients or prospects just got it and were more than happy to work with us in that way and really didn't mind, especially when they realised we could service them, across different markets without needing a physical presence in that market, because that's very expensive, to hire 10 agencies with an office, in many countries, it's extremely expensive. So I think that now, that's that kind of sense that we're a bit of a wild card and, perhaps a bit of a risky choice. That's now completely gone because all agencies are working in that way and nobody would buy an agency just because they had a nice office anymore. So in that sense, our argument has been made for us, which is great. I think as companies come to us and perhaps with leaner budgets and want more for their money, that's only going to work in our favour.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. A really fascinating point about, that whole concept of needing a big, nice office and being that established in the sense purely of physical location. How is that going to change, we're moving forward? Now people have experienced these 4 months of really not being in an office at all and still working on. Just talking about the now then, and obviously you guys were virtual before this, but has the past 4 months changed in any way? What, in terms of the way you're looking about working going forwards or your priorities in the next immediate couple of months?
We're probably being a lot more proactive than we have been in the past in terms of our new business activity. George talked before about our pipeline sort of coming back to pre-COVID levels, which I think it has. But we are conscious that we want to try and deliver lots of opportunities to our network, our freelance network and our partners who have small agencies who need business. So we are sort of changing tack a little bit and perhaps going out there more aggressively. I don't like that word, but more proactively to go after clients. Perhaps companies that we already work with in certain countries to see whether they need support in other markets is something that we're doing. We always see success there. But really, I think we're just working as before because we've always worked with dispersed teams. This way of working is natural to us. So I think it's just a question of sort of not picking up where we left off, but hopefully seeing things level off a little bit and just sort of gathering ourselves and realising that actually we can't always, we've been very lucky in the past in that business has generally come to us because we're a sort of innovative proposition. Even until recent years, there weren't many other agencies set up like this. And so we tended to pick up business for that reason. And now, obviously, everybody's virtual. It isn't going to be such a USP. So we need to be really clear on what we can offer and why we're the best choice of agency for a client.
And George, you talked about the pre-COVID, you've got a pre-COVID level of interest, or roughly in and about that. Have you noticed any change in what people are asking for, what people are inquiring about in particular, or is it much the same as it was before?
I think initially it was very much COVID-related projects, so apps that were being launched that are around COVID and things like that. So very COVID or campaigns or messages that could be kind of tied in with COVID. And now, no, I'd say it's more back to, okay, well, we had to delay the launch for obvious reasons. Now we want to get started, or we need to now communicate. Perhaps, we have quite a big regional network within the UK as well. So we're very well placed internationally, but also regionally within the UK, thinking more about grassroots because people are perhaps more focused on their local region. So how can we support them on communicating better as an international business in those UK regions as well? So that's been an interesting look at things. I think it's about lots of the briefs are really flexible. So it's showing how we can be, how we can help them respond quickly to a market need or in a very flexible way. And I think that's been the big focus for us is, whether it's an internal comms person, how can we show our stellar kind of team of people and how can we support them with their requirements, whether it's regional, international, or by kind of discipline.
Just to talk about the fact that, you guys had that infrastructure and could work virtually from the get-go. Over the past few months, you've also seen a lot of products, services really innovating as well in that tech space to offer virtual solutions for companies who find themselves in challenging positions, who follow traditional working practices. Have you seen anything, or have you developed new methods and new ways of working from lockdown? Has lockdown also innovated your working practices, or shown you new products or new ways of doing things that you actually weren't previously aware of?
In terms of tech tools, we've seen that being brilliant. Obviously, we live our life on Slack, on Zoom and all of those. But one we saw recently, which was brilliant, just actually James brought to our attention yesterday, was
It's what? Sorry, what was that?
It's brilliant, and it's I'll send it to you, Rob, but I think it's a beta phase now, but it's a way of presenting with dynamic content behind you. So you could do a pitch that way. And actually we have pitched on one, we've been successful on our pitches on Zoom during COVID, but it was just a really neat way of bringing lots of different content to life without it just being a Zoom and sharing your screen. There was many more ways of doing it. And it looked amazing. I thought, well, actually, like the last recession, 2008, Airbnb came out of that, all these other innovative brands. I think there'll be a lot that will come out in terms of tech and working ways online, working better online. I think we'll see loads more kind of come out of this. So certainly this, I think is, it probably was conceived during COVID, and I hope it has lots of success at the end of it because it looks great.
It's supposed to signal that, they hope it'll herald the death of PowerPoint. So no more staring at PowerPoint.
No more PowerPoint. My goodness, that would be a seismic change in the way things operate.
This thing, you sort of touch and pull elements in and out, so all the users can decide what they want to look at, and you can make yourself smaller on the screen. It's very, very clever. We're always looking at new.
And more of that, please. That'd be great.
Well, let's talk in the final section about the industry more widely and the long-term view as well. You guys are in a really interesting space because the way that you work is a way that a lot of companies are now looking to possibly try and work in the future. So this move to potentially this hybrid model, or maybe still having a slight workplace, but also a lot of people working virtually as well. In a way, what are your key tips, I suppose, as to how PRs can evolve towards that direction as seamlessly as possible, and what are perhaps the key pitfalls to avoid as you'd make that transition?
I think it's culture first, isn't it? So it has to work for people who work with you. And actually, probably there's people who haven't wanted to work with us in the past because they don't want to work virtually, at least part of the time. And we totally understand that. It's got to work for everyone, and it won't work for everyone. So I think, as you say, we're very much there for a hybrid of both. Nicky and I, up until COVID, were in London probably 2 or 3 times a week. Obviously there when necessary as well, but equally enjoyed being in the comfort of our own home office as well. And I think that's where it will go, that you don't need to be present unless it counts for you or your team members. And I think that's really important, because we would still go and work in our clients' offices if that's what the client needed. We just didn't want to be 9 to 5 in an office without a real value to that. And I think there will people do value that, and they should continue to value that, but that's just not our value system. So I think there will be a mix, and lots of agencies are evaluating that now, and lots are talking about how that looks. Some have gone back already in office, and I'm all for that if that works for them. And I think it is a question of making sure it works for you and your teams, and if it doesn't, you need to think very carefully about whether you need to impose that anymore.
What do you say to people, maybe PR agency managers and directors and CEOs who are looking at the model of hybrid or some kind of virtual workplace solution going forwards, but are really concerned or, don't quite understand how you can ensure the same level of productivity, teamwork, team ethos, and that idea of being able to come together very quickly and solve a problem in person? What would you say to people who harbour those kind of concerns?
I would hope that the experience of the last few months has sort of quelled those concerns to some extent, because everybody's had to work in an effective and productive way. And from what I hear talking to fellow agency owners, is that there was sort of quite a lot of enthusiasm or commitment at the beginning, and now particularly amongst junior people that's really kind of ebbed off. It's very difficult if you're living in a flat share. I think everyone's experience is very different in terms of how productive and committed you're able to be depending on your circumstances. But I would like to think that agency owners could take the best bits of what's happened over the pandemic, and there's always a balance. So I think that hopefully it's been proven that it's possible to work productively, not with everybody not being in the same room at the same time all of the time. And I would hope that everybody working in the industry or people working from home have worked out how to make that work for them as well. And then I think the two ought to be able to sort of meet in the middle somehow. So if agencies feel, and most will, we don't advocate for working from home for everybody or virtual working for everybody all of the time at all, but perhaps there's a compromise where the office the physical building becomes more fit for purpose for the team and the business that is occupying it. So maybe a smaller space, maybe there needs to be a better degree of sort of understanding as to who's coming in and when and why, and what they need to come in for. And then just harnessing all the kind of collaboration tools and sort of principles of good communication that had to have been learned over the last few months, so that when people aren't all together all the time, the wheel continues to turn and business just works as usual now that it's got to that point. So I don't think, I hope we'd have to go backwards.
Yeah. I think it's a question of trust, isn't it? And I think hopefully that their trust is there, because even it's to try and get away from presenteeism and having to be in a formal place. You can get presenteeism online as well, virtually. You can set up multiple Zoom calls all day just to check where your teams are. That's not a great way of working either if you're working virtually. So it's about having that mix, isn't it? Of agencies need to trust that their teams are doing great work, and the teams need to want to be where they are. And I think having those really honest conversations, you'll come out with a plan that could work for everyone. And I think it will be a mix. I think it won't be everyone coming back 5 into the office. I think it'd be a really nice mix. I'm really envious of those people. When I started out my career, I would have loved to have that ability to, work from home sometimes and not others, you know.
Some aspects of the job are better done face to face. So I suppose it's just understanding what the purpose is for needing people to be in the same physical place at one time, and then making sure that that's the time when they are together, rather than just saying we all need to be together all of the time. I think that will have an impact on talent, recruitment and retention for agencies that want to go back to the way things were before COVID, because I think everybody, we've been saying this for a while, everybody wants a degree of flexibility in their work life and patterns for whatever reason, not just because you've got children. So yeah, it'd be interesting.
And that'd be really interesting as well as a fuel for change as a long-term thing in the industry. Resourcing in talent, people are going to maybe be expecting some kind of flexibility from employers, and that will shift the industry in its own right. Yeah.
And from a female perspective, being able to, you know, I think it'd be a lot easier for a working mum to come back with a flexible role, whether that was in terms of number of days, number of hours per day, or whatever, however that looked like. I think that'd be a lot easier now, because the test case has been done that you can work partly from home and you can make it work. And I think that's really brilliant news for lots of mums coming back, lots of returners.
Hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so, absolutely. George and Nicky, how can people who are listening get in contact with you, both individually but also as part of the PR Network?
The PR Network is on Twitter. It's at PR Network. And I'm at Nicky Regazzoni.
And I'm at George Blizzard.
Look at that perfect handover between you two, totally in sync there. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. And of course, thanks for listening to everyone who's listened and indeed watched on YouTube to the podcast and video podcast. This is an ongoing series, so if you like what you heard, you can find us at PR in Lockdown podcast on your preferred podcast library, iTunes, Spotify, wherever. And also you'll see our smiling faces on a video podcast on YouTube as well, which is also on the PRCA's YouTube channel as well. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. PR in Lockdown is presented by Rob Double, and the guests this episode were George Blizzard and Nicky Regazzoni from the PR Network. It was created by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA.